Hi, my name is Shelby Whitaker. I'm 31 years old, and this is my story. It's not a story I ever imagined I'd tell out loud, especially not to strangers, but sometimes the most unexpected betrayals come from those closest to you. And when that betrayal cuts deep enough, you realize silence is no longer strength, it's surrender. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room full of people who were supposed to love you, who were supposed to celebrate you, and felt like you didn't belong at all? Not because you weren't good enough, not because you'd done something wrong, but because they couldn't stand to see how far you'd come without them? That's what happened to me at my own brother's wedding. And that's the moment I decided to pull the very contract that would destroy everything they thought they had built. But let's rewind. Because to understand why I did what I did, you need to understand where I came from. I was born and raised in Norman, Oklahoma. My family, let's just say they weren't exactly the warm, southern comfort kind. On the surface, we looked picture perfect. My dad owned a small construction company that he ran with my uncle. My mom was involved in church and bake sales. We had a nice house, 2 cars in the driveway, and Christmas photos with matching pajamas. But behind closed doors, everything was about my brother, Colton. Colton was the golden child, always had been, star quarterback, homecoming king, Daddy's favorite, Mama's pride. He could do no wrong, and I could do no right. Let me know in the comments if you're watching this right now, because if you've ever been told to stay small, you're not alone. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see how I turned being dismissed into building something unforgettable. I remember when I got my full-ride scholarship to the University of Oklahoma, something I fought tooth and nail for. I walked into the kitchen, grinning ear to ear, letter in hand, ready to share the news. My mom barely looked up from her mixing bowl. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Colton's team made state finals?" That moment stuck with me for years. I remember thinking, I'm never going to be enough for them, not as a daughter, not as a sister, not even as a human being. So I stopped trying. College became my escape. I studied business, interned every summer, and networked harder than anyone else in my year. By the time I was 26, I'd founded my own consulting firm, Whitaker Strategies. At 29, I landed a multi-million-dollar contract with a local development group that was quietly revolutionizing mid-sized cities across Oklahoma. It was that contract that changed my life, and eventually would change theirs. They just didn't know it yet. Despite everything, I never cut off my family. I still showed up for birthdays, holidays, and Sunday lunches. I smiled when I was ignored. I offered help when it wasn't acknowledged. I played the good daughter role like a pro because deep down, a part of me still hoped they'd see me, not as Colton's shadow, but as my own person. And then came the wedding. Colton was getting married to a woman named Haley, sweet, charming, blonde, southern-bred with a 1,000,000-watt smile. Everyone loved her. I tried to, too. She was harmless, but clearly had no idea about the family dynamics she'd walked into. When the wedding invitation arrived, I already knew what it would say before I opened it. Colton and Haley Whitaker request the pleasure of your company. No mention of me giving a speech. No special recognition, just a seat somewhere in the back. Still, I RSVP'd yes. The wedding was held at a luxury ranch estate in the outskirts of Norman, horses grazing behind white fences, rustic chandeliers in the barn-turned ballroom, and country music echoing in the distance. It was a flawless Southern affair, and I wore my finest navy blue dress with heels that hurt like hell. I was determined not to give them one more thing to critique. But when I arrived and asked the usher where I was seated, he checked the list and smiled politely. "Oh yes, Ms. Whitaker. You're with the catering staff, right through the kitchen doors." I blinked. "Excuse me?" He showed me the printed list. Table 16, tucked behind the swinging kitchen door next to the service station. I wasn't even in the main hall. I wasn't just in the back, I was behind the back. I wanted to think it was a mistake, that someone had shuffled names incorrectly, that maybe there had been some last-minute changes. So I found the wedding planner. She looked at me with a mix of apology and confusion and said, "Colton told us you preferred to keep a low profile. He said you wouldn't mind." Wouldn't mind. I was seated with distant cousins and 2 vendors who didn't even know who the groom was. I could hear the laughter and champagne toasts from the ballroom, but I wasn't part of it. That's when it hit me. They hadn't just overlooked me. They had deliberately pushed me aside, like I was an afterthought, like my presence was something to be hidden. All those years of quiet endurance, all those years of proving myself. For what? To be seated next to the dishwasher at my own brother's wedding? And that's when something in me snapped. Not in rage, not in sorrow, but in clarity. Because what they didn't know was that the land where the reception was being held, the property Colton's new father-in-law planned to develop into luxury rentals, that contract, the very approval that would turn this land into profit, was signed under my company's advisory. My company had the final say, and I had just been given a very compelling reason to pull the plug. But I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I stood up, smiled graciously at the people who didn't know who I was, walked through the kitchen, and slipped into the quiet hallway behind the ballroom. I stared at the scene, the music, the glowing fairy lights, Colton twirling Haley in the center of the dance floor. It looked like a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has a reckoning. The next morning, I called my legal team and initiated a full review of the development deal. Cited zoning violations, environmental red flags. I had leverage, and now I had the motivation to use it. But this isn't just a story about revenge. This is about reclaiming your worth when the people who should have protected it tried to bury it. It's about finally standing in the light, even if it means burning bridges behind you. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remind people exactly who they dismissed. And I wasn't just Shelby, the forgotten sister anymore. I was the woman with the pen, and I was done being silent. The Monday after the wedding, I sat in my downtown Oklahoma City office with the blinds drawn, staring at the folder on my desk. My assistant, Marcy, had prepped everything I needed. Emails, legal attachments, preliminary drafts. All I had to do was sign off and send it back to the developers. But I didn't. Not yet. I had to make sure they understood this wasn't personal. Or at least, that it wasn't just personal. This was business. The very thing they thought I wasn't capable of handling when I was growing up. They spent their entire lives underestimating me. But they were about to learn that the quiet girl they had pushed into the background had grown into the woman who controlled their future. Colton had no idea what was coming. That night, I went home to my condo, opened a bottle of wine, and reread the fine print of the contract that linked my consulting firm to Red River Development, the company managing the construction of Haley's father's real estate dream. It was all there. My signature, my terms, my escape clauses. I didn't need a dramatic move. I needed precision. My company had the right to reevaluate partnerships based on projected environmental impact and public backlash, and we were entering that territory fast. I drafted the email carefully, polite, respectful, but firm. I cited irregularities in the soil testing, issues with the local community board, and the sudden influx of complaints we'd received about historical preservation. I ended it with a call for an indefinite hold on the project, pending full review. I copied my legal team, Barlow and Finch, and hit send. It was done. The next morning, my phone started buzzing at 7:46 a.m. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it ring. Then another, then another. By 8:05, Marcy knocked on my office door, looking pale. "Shelby," she said, holding a stack of papers and her phone at the same time. "We've got trouble. Red River is freaking out. Someone leaked the delay to the press, and it's already online. The Whitaker Ranch project is trending." I took the papers from her and skimmed the headlines. Luxury wedding venue may be at risk amid legal development crisis. Oklahoma developer faces major setback. Local firm pulls out. Environmental review freezes Whitaker Ranch construction. I hadn't expected the leak. But I wasn't mad. In fact, I smiled. Just a little. Because sometimes, fate hands you the perfect storm without you even asking for it. By lunchtime, I got a call from my mother. "Shelby Ann," she said in a tone that always made my stomach tighten. "What did you do?" I didn't answer right away. "You embarrassed your brother," she continued. "You humiliated this family. Whatever this power play is, you better stop it. Now." I could feel my pulse in my neck, hot and hard, but I kept my voice calm. I didn't humiliate the family, Mom. The family humiliated me. At the wedding, at every family gathering, Every moment I ever tried to share my success, I was brushed aside like I didn't matter. So no, this isn't a power play. This is me doing my job. There was a pause. Then the sound of her voice, low and bitter. You always were dramatic. And just like that, she hung up. The thing about being the black sheep of the family is, eventually, you stop trying to be seen. And once you stop trying, you finally see clearly. Their love was conditional. Conditional on me staying small, on me playing along, on me knowing my place. And the kitchen seat at the wedding had been the final, quiet message. You don't belong with us. You never did. But now I had the upper hand, and I wasn't done yet. By Thursday, I received a formal request from Red River for an emergency mediation meeting. Their legal counsel was trying to find a way to salvage the deal. I agreed, on one condition, that the meeting be held at my office. They didn't like it, but they had no choice. So Friday morning they arrived. 3 men in dark suits and 1 woman in red heels who clearly ran the room. They were polite but tense. As we exchanged pleasantries, I noticed Haley's father, Thomas Caldwell, wasn't with them, but he was mentioned frequently, like a ghost looming over every word. We're hoping to avoid any unnecessary damage, the woman said smoothly. This project is important to the community, and we believe that with the right adjustments, we can move forward. I listened. I nodded. Then I handed them a folder. Inside were detailed findings from an independent environmental firm my company had hired months earlier. The results weren't flattering. The project had already skirted too close to protected zones, and local residents weren't exactly thrilled about a luxury resort popping up on what used to be public land. I met their eyes, one by one. This isn't personal, but if this deal goes public the way it's written now, it won't just reflect badly on Red River. It'll bring your investors down with it. You'll be looking at lawsuits, protests, and media investigations. I'm offering you a way out. The room went silent. Then one of the men leaned forward. What would it take to keep you on board? And that's when I laid it out. I wanted Colton's involvement removed from all branding and marketing materials. I wanted my company's logo front and center. I wanted a public acknowledgement of the consulting leadership. And most of all, I wanted them to drop any attempts to acquire the second parcel of land adjacent to the venue, the one where the community garden still stood. They agreed, not happily, but they agreed. By the time the meeting ended, I walked them to the elevator and watched them disappear behind closing doors. Then I went back to my office, sat down, and took a deep breath. That night, I received a text from Colton. Did you do this to hurt me? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. No, I did it to protect myself. He never responded, but Haley did. She called me the next day, her voice trembling. I didn't know they did that to you, she said. At the wedding. I swear, I thought it was a mix-up. I didn't want to get in the middle, but I'm sorry, Shelby. You didn't deserve that. I didn't say anything for a while, because even if she meant it, it didn't change what had been done, what had been allowed. But still, her voice cracked in a way that made me think maybe she wasn't like the rest of them. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. Over the next few weeks, things calmed. The press quieted down, the project was restructured, and my team gained more respect in the business community than ever before. My name, once an afterthought in my own family, was now mentioned in headlines and panel discussions across the industry. And yet, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this point. All the years of being dismissed, all the birthdays where I sat alone at the end of the table, all the wins they never cheered for. The wedding seat in the kitchen wasn't just a mistake. It was a statement. And now, so was mine. I didn't burn the bridge, but I made sure they'd never forget the day they tried to bury me behind a swinging door, because that's the day I built my own damn ballroom, and I wasn't finished yet. It had been 3 weeks since the meeting with Red River. On the surface, everything looked smooth again. The revised contracts were filed, my team was busy, and the press had shifted to its next big scandal. But I knew better. Calm doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes calm means something is hiding just beneath the surface, waiting to explode. I was in my office reviewing the updated project timeline when I got an unexpected call from my uncle Dennis. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years. Not since he drunkenly told me during a family barbecue that I'd never measure up to the boys in the family. I answered out of sheer curiosity. "Shelby," he said, his voice gravelly and tight. "We need to talk." I could tell right away something was wrong. "What is it?" "It's Colton. He's not doing well. You might want to go see him." I stayed quiet. Uncle Dennis sighed on the other end. "He's not eating. He barely talks. Keeps blaming himself for the deal falling apart. Says you hate him." I closed my eyes for a second and let the silence stretch out before I responded. "I don't hate him, Uncle Dennis, but actions have consequences. He's your brother," he muttered. Like that alone should erase everything. "I was his sister too," I said, and hung up. Still, something about that call lingered in the back of my mind. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about Colton, how we used to build forts in the backyard when we were kids, how he'd sneak into my room when there was a thunderstorm, claiming he wasn't scared, just checking on me. Somewhere along the line, that brother had disappeared, replaced by someone who couldn't even look at me across the dinner table without a smirk. But if he was spiraling now, it wasn't because I ruined him. It was because I stopped protecting him from the fallout of his own arrogance. 2 days later, I saw Haley's name pop up on my phone. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Shelby?" she said, her voice small. "I'm here. I know you probably don't want to talk, but Colton needs help. Real help. I've tried everything. Therapy, friends, even his old coach. But he keeps talking about how he failed the family, how he let your father down, and he keeps blaming it all on himself." I stayed silent for a moment. "He's not wrong," I finally said. "I know," she whispered, "but he's still my husband." That stuck with me, not because I felt sorry for him, but because for the first time, someone was willing to say out loud what no one in my family ever had, that he wasn't blameless, that what they'd done to me had weight. Later that week, I agreed to meet Haley at a small cafe on Campus Corner in Norman. She looked tired, worn down, her usual sparkle replaced with something more fragile. "I'm not asking you to fix him," she said, cradling a cup of untouched tea, "but I think he needs to hear from you. Not to make him feel better, but maybe to help him understand. I don't think he ever did." That conversation shifted something inside me, not because I wanted to give Colton peace, but because I wanted to speak my truth, out loud, without shrinking. I asked her to bring him to my office the next morning. No family members, no distractions. He walked in looking thinner, his face pale, eyes shadowed with guilt and sleepless nights. He didn't sit at first, just stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "I don't know what to say," he finally muttered. "Then maybe it's better you listen," I said calmly. He nodded and sat. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the brother who had betrayed me, but the boy who used to chase fireflies with me under the stars. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was tired. Tired of carrying the weight of being overlooked, of pretending I didn't care, of pushing my achievements into shadows so his ego wouldn't feel threatened. "You know, Colton," I began, "for years, I made excuses for you, for Mom and Dad, for everyone. I told myself it didn't matter that they never celebrated my wins, that they left me off the speeches, forgot my birthdays, didn't care where I lived or what I built. I thought if I just worked hard enough, I'd earn their respect." He looked down. "But the truth is, I was never going to get it. Not because I wasn't enough, but because I made them uncomfortable, because I didn't fit their definition of success, because I challenged everything they told themselves about who mattered in this family." He looked up, pain behind his eyes. "I didn't ask them to treat you like that." "No," I said, "but you never stopped them either." That landed harder than I expected. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "I didn't know how," he said quietly. "They always told me to lead, that I was the example, that I had to win. And when you started winning without them, I didn't know what to do." I nodded, feeling the ache rise again. "You could have just said congratulations." He closed his eyes. We sat in silence for a while. Then he spoke again. "I messed up. The wedding? That wasn't just Haley's idea. I told them to put you in the back. I thought maybe it'd be easier than having you steal the spotlight again." There it was, the confession. It should have made me furious, but it didn't. It just confirmed what I already knew. "I don't need the spotlight," I said. I just needed a seat at the table. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Shelby. I really am. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed him. But believing him didn't mean forgetting. I'm moving forward with the project, I said. But it's going to be on my terms. My name, my oversight, and full recognition for my team. I understand, he said. You earned it. I stood and walked to the window where he had been standing. You don't have to hate me for becoming what they never saw in me, I said. But you do have to live with it. He nodded and stood as well. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something shifted in that room. Something real. A small crack in the wall we'd built between us. Later that day, I received an email from Red River's CEO. The project was moving forward under a new name, Whitaker Rise. My company would be listed as executive consultants, and the adjacent land would be turned into a community park, as I had originally requested. And for the first time ever, my name was on every public release. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city. I thought about all the years I'd fought to be seen, to be heard, to matter, and I realized I wasn't just doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing it for every person who had ever been seated in the kitchen when they deserved a place in the ballroom. Because sometimes the point of no return isn't a place of destruction. Sometimes it's the beginning of something stronger. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels like something has finally settled into place after years of tension. I was no longer reacting. I was directing. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had rewritten my own narrative. And yet, even in that new calm, the remnants of old wounds still echoed in quiet corners of my mind. Healing isn't instant. It's a slow, steady unraveling of what you once believed about yourself and who made you believe it. Professionally, things were better than ever. My team was energized. Our office was buzzing with new opportunities, and the Whitaker Rise project was already drawing national attention. I was invited to speak on panels, asked to mentor young women in business, even featured in a magazine spread under the title, The Quiet Power of Shelby Whitaker. Quiet power. I liked the sound of that. Not flashy, not loud, just undeniable. But personally, I was still navigating unfamiliar ground. Colton and I hadn't spoken again since our meeting. He hadn't reached out, and I hadn't pushed. I didn't need validation from him anymore, but part of me still hoped he'd show up, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. Maybe that was asking too much. One afternoon, as I walked through the site of the new development, hard hat on and clipboard in hand, I stopped by the corner where the community garden would be. It was still just dirt and broken fences, but I could already envision it. Raised beds of vegetables, winding paths, benches under wide oak trees. A place for people to breathe, to gather, to grow. It was symbolic, really. A piece of land everyone else had dismissed suddenly becoming a centerpiece. Just like me. As I stood there, I heard footsteps crunch behind me. I turned to see Haley walking up, hands in her coat pockets, hair pulled back in a loose braid. I heard you might be out here, she said softly. I nodded. I come by every couple days. Helps me think. She smiled faintly and looked around. It's going to be beautiful. That's the plan. We stood there in silence for a few seconds before she spoke again. Colton's been better. He's going to therapy. Took a leave from work. He's finally starting to unravel everything he kept buried. I didn't respond right away. I just kept staring at the empty garden. He wants to reach out, she added, but he's scared he'll make it worse. I sighed. He doesn't owe me anything. I'm not holding my breath for an apology. I just hope he learns something from all this. That's enough for me? She nodded, then hesitated. I have to tell you something else. I glanced at her. My father was furious after the contract change. He tried to get Red River to replace you, said you were a liability, but they wouldn't budge. You'd made too much sense. Your numbers, your projections, they were airtight. They told him, Shelby Whitaker saved this project. And I think that's when I realized you weren't just fighting for a seat at the table. You were fighting to rebuild the whole damn room. Her words caught me off guard, in the best way. Not because I needed the praise, but because they came from someone who had once stood on the other side of everything I'd pushed against. And she saw me now. Really saw me. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. That night, I went home and opened a box I hadn't touched in years. It was full of old photos, birthday cards, notes from school. Buried at the bottom was a picture of me and Colton as kids. We were maybe 6 and 8, sitting in a laundry basket with a cardboard pirate ship taped to the sides. He had a paper hat. I had a wooden spoon as a sword. We looked happy, before all the roles were handed out, before the scripts were written. I stared at it for a long time, and then, without knowing why, I called him. He picked up on the third ring. "Shelby," he said, almost breathless. "Hey," I said. "Just wanted to say, I found that photo of us in the pirate ship." A pause, then a laugh. "I remember that. You got mad because I kept steering into the couch. Because you're a terrible captain," I said. And for the first time in years, we both laughed together, not at each other, not to fill silence, but because we remembered something real. It wasn't a magical fix. That call didn't erase everything, but it cracked the door open just enough. From there, I kept moving, kept building. I gave a speech at the groundbreaking ceremony for the garden, speaking about the power of second chances, not just for land, but for people. I saw my parents there in the crowd. My mother clapped. My father looked down the whole time, but they came. That was something. Afterward, my mom approached me, tears in her eyes. She didn't say much, just hugged me tighter than she had in years. "I should have been better," she whispered. I didn't say I forgave her. I didn't rush to make her feel better. I just held her hand for a moment and nodded. That was enough. In the months that followed, the project moved fast. The community garden took shape. Local families volunteered to help build benches and paint murals. Children laughed as they planted sunflowers and tomatoes. Elderly couples came by with iced tea and lawn chairs, telling stories about what the land used to be before the developers rolled in. And through it all, I found pieces of myself I thought I'd lost. Not just the successful CEO, not just the wronged sister, but the little girl in the laundry basket who believed in imaginary worlds and made her own magic. One afternoon, as I was walking through the finished garden, I saw Colton sitting alone on one of the benches. I hadn't expected him, but something told me to sit beside him. "I see why this place matters," he said quietly. It always did. No one just stopped to notice. We watched a group of teenagers planting herbs together, laughing over who had the dirtiest hands. "I want to do better," he said. "Not just say it. I want to mean it." I looked at him and nodded, then start by showing up, for real this time. He looked me in the eyes, and I saw something shift, something honest. "I will." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the garden, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind you fake for Instagram or holiday cards. Real peace. The kind that settles deep in your bones when you finally know who you are, regardless of who did or didn't believe in you. I had been underestimated, sidelined and silenced, but I had risen, not just to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I was always worth the seat. Hell, worth the whole table. And now I was building spaces where no one else would be sent to the kitchen. The morning of the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Whitaker Rise arrived with a strange mix of adrenaline and quiet reflection. The final phase of the project was complete. The luxury residences stood gleaming in the sunlight behind the restored barn venue, and the community garden bloomed in full color beside them, anchoring the land in a way that no one could ignore. It was everything I had fought for: beauty, functionality, and respect. I arrived early, before the crowd, needing a moment to take it all in alone. My heels clicked softly against the new stone path as I walked past the gazebo we'd built at the heart of the garden. I paused there, letting my fingers brush the smooth wood rail. Just a few feet away, a plaque had been mounted into the earth, engraved with a quote I'd chosen months ago but had kept secret until today. In a world that tried to silence her, she planted her voice into the ground, and it grew. Those words weren't just for me. They were for every girl who had ever been told to be smaller, to sit quietly, to wait her turn. I had waited long enough. Now I was blooming. Marcy found me there a few minutes later, clipboard in hand, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Press is setting up. Mayor's here, and your parents just arrived." I nodded. "Thank you. Give me 5 more minutes." She stepped away, and I stood alone again, staring at the reflection of the sky in the small water feature we'd added to the garden. The surface was calm, but underneath, I could still feel the ripples of everything I'd been through. My brother's betrayal, my parents' dismissal, the years of being invisible. Today was more than just a launch. It was a reckoning. When I finally made my way to the stage, I saw a sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces. Developers, city council members, journalists, local families. My team stood to the left, beaming with pride. Colton stood in the back beside Haley, arms crossed. But he was there. That mattered more than I expected. The mayor introduced me with rehearsed charm, highlighting my leadership, my vision, my role in saving the project. It was surreal hearing those words spoken aloud after so many years of being told to stay quiet, to not make waves, to know my place. When it was my turn to speak, I took a breath and stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for being here," I began, eyes scanning the crowd. "What you see around you didn't come easy. Not the buildings, not the garden, not even the microphone I'm holding. Every inch of this place was earned through conflict, doubt, and an unwavering belief that we deserve better." People nodded. Some clapped. I continued. 2 years ago, this land was just another forgotten plot on the edge of town. Developers saw numbers, investors saw profit, but I saw potential, not just in concrete and contracts, but in people, in stories, in second chances. I paused, heart pounding in my chest. And if I'm honest, this isn't just about a project. It's about what happens when someone spends their whole life being underestimated, pushed aside, and finally decides not to stay quiet anymore. I was once seated in the kitchen at an event that was supposed to be a celebration. Today, I stand before you on this stage, not because I was invited, but because I built it. The crowd erupted in applause. My voice had stayed steady, but my hands trembled slightly behind the podium. I wasn't used to this much acknowledgement, but I stood my ground. After the ceremony, people came up to shake my hand, congratulate me, ask for interviews. I smiled. I posed for pictures. I thanked them all, but a part of me kept scanning the crowd for my parents. When I finally spotted them, they were standing near the garden, looking at the plaque. My mother's hand was over her mouth. My father had his arms folded, his expression unreadable. I approached them slowly. Mom turned to me first. Her eyes were glassy. That quote, "It's beautiful." I nodded. It felt right. She hesitated. "I want to apologize again. For everything. For the wedding. For all the birthdays and events and years where we didn't see you." Her voice cracked. "I think I was afraid of what it would mean if we admitted you didn't need us to succeed." I didn't respond immediately. There was too much history to unpack in a single conversation, but I looked at her and said, "You don't have to understand everything. Just don't look away anymore." She nodded quickly, wiping a tear from her cheek. My father finally spoke. "You did good, Shelby." It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't everything I'd wanted, but it was something. That night, after the event had wrapped and the sun dipped below the horizon, I returned to the garden alone. The lights we'd strung through the trees cast a soft golden glow. I sat on the same bench where Colton had once confessed his regret and let the silence surround me. My phone buzzed. A message from Colton. "You were incredible today. I'm proud of you." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Then I set the phone down and looked up at the sky. The stars were beginning to pierce through the evening haze, quiet and unwavering. This was the moment I had dreamed of. Not the applause, not the press, but the peace, the knowing, the steady heartbeat of resilience that had carried me through every ignored invitation, every seat in the back, every whispered slight. I had taken all their dismissals, all their silence, and turned them into something real, something lasting. And now, the world had no choice but to hear me. A month had passed since the ribbon cutting, but something about that day still lingered in the way people looked at me, the way they spoke my name, the way my family walked around me now, carefully, like they'd only just discovered I had edges sharp enough to cut. And I suppose that was the truth. I'd spent most of my life sanded down for their comfort. Now I had given myself permission to be whole, even if that meant they had to learn how to meet me where I stood. Work didn't slow down. Whitaker Strategies had become a name people respected, not just in Norman or Oklahoma City, but across state lines. I was getting calls from Dallas, Austin, even Denver. People who had once doubted me now wanted to collaborate. And for every hand that once overlooked mine, there were now doors opening, not because I demanded them to, but because I had earned the keys. But with growth came space, and space brought reflection. I'd always thought that when I reached a certain level of success, it would fix something inside me, that if I just worked harder, achieved more, got the recognition I'd been denied for so long, the ache would vanish. But success doesn't erase history. It only gives you better tools to carry it. And I was carrying a lot. One Saturday morning, I drove out to the lake near our old family cabin. I hadn't been there in years, but the roads were still familiar, winding, quiet. I parked near the dock and sat on the hood of my car, looking out over the water. This was where we used to spend summers, where Colton and I would catch fireflies and dare each other to swim after dark, where Mom would burn the marshmallows and Dad would always fall asleep in the lawn chair before the stories were done. It was where I learned how to disappear in plain sight. I hadn't come to revisit pain. I'd come to lay it down. Somewhere out here, among the cattails and the creaking trees, I wanted to leave behind the version of myself that had spent too long asking for permission to matter. I reached into my bag and pulled out a letter I'd written to my younger self the night after the garden was finished. I hadn't known what to do with it at the time, but here, now, it made sense. I unfolded it and read it aloud to the quiet. Dear Shelby, I know you're tired. I know you feel like no one sees you. Like the louder you try to shine, the harder they try to dim you. But I want you to know something. They're wrong. You are not too much. You are not too ambitious, too direct, too loud, too soft, too anything. You are exactly what the world needs more of. Relentless, kind, brilliant fire. Don't shrink. Don't fold. And don't wait for them to clap before you stand. Stand anyway. I folded the letter and tucked it under a rock by the water's edge. Maybe someone would find it one day. Or maybe it would just stay there, breaking down slowly with the seasons, just like all the pieces of me I no longer needed to carry. On the drive back to the city, I felt lighter. The following week, I got a call from a woman named Evelyn Ross. She was starting a scholarship fund for young women in business and wanted me to be on the advisory board. I asked her why she thought of me. Because your name kept coming up, she said. You've become a symbol around here, of what's possible. I smiled at that. Not because I needed the praise, but because someone had seen the journey, not just the destination. The first meeting of the scholarship board was held in a historic building downtown that had once been a textile factory. Now it was a space for innovation, restored with purpose. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. As I walked through its halls, I thought about how things, places, people, identities, can be repurposed, reclaimed, made useful again. During the meeting, I spoke about mentorship, about representation, about how the smallest moment of recognition can be the spark that ignites someone's future. And as I looked around the table at the young women listening, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe this was what the fight had been for. Not just a garden, not just a name on a contract, but the ability to create ripple effects that outlived the hurt. Later that month, Colton invited me to dinner. Not a family dinner, just him, just us. We met at a small Italian place near his new office. He looked healthier, softer around the edges. When the waiter brought our drinks, Colton raised his glass toward me. To your voice, he said, and to finally hearing it. We didn't rehash everything. We didn't need to. He told me he was working on himself, really working this time. He'd been digging into his own beliefs, questioning the ways he had been shaped, the ways he'd hurt others without even realizing it. You were always the brave one, he said. I blinked. That wasn't something I'd ever expected to hear. You just did it quietly, he added. And that's the kind that lasts. I let those words land. Then I raised my glass too. To growth, I said. And to showing up late, but still showing up. We laughed. In the months that followed, my parents started coming around more. Dad asked about my projects. Mom offered to help with the scholarship events. It wasn't perfect. It probably never would be. But the difference was, I no longer needed their approval. I welcomed their presence, but I no longer depended on it to feel whole. The kitchen seat had been a trigger. But now, it was just a memory. One that reminded me how far I'd come. I'd been boxed out, overlooked, pushed to the margins. But I'd turned that space into a vantage point. I'd studied every move, learned every lesson, and when the time came, I built my own seat, with steel and voice and fire. And now I wasn't just sitting at the table. I was shaping it. There's something powerful about walking into rooms that once made you feel small and realizing you no longer need to prove anything. You just exist. And that is enough. That is everything. One night, as I walked through the garden at Whitaker Rise again, I noticed a young girl sitting on a bench, sketching. She looked up and smiled. "Are you the lady who made this place?" I smiled back. "One of them." "It's really cool," she said. "I want to make stuff like this one day." "You will," I told her. "Just don't let anyone tell you where to sit." She nodded like she understood, even if only in part. And as I walked away, I realized I had become what I needed when I was her age. Not loud, not flashy, but solid, visible, real. And that, more than anything, was the victory. 1 year later, I found myself standing in front of a full lecture hall at the University of Oklahoma, not far from where it all began. The same university that once saw me as just another student in the back row had now invited me to deliver the keynote address for the School of Business's annual Women in Leadership event. The room buzzed with anticipation, filled with young women taking notes, adjusting blazers, clutching notebooks, hoping to find some secret in my story that they could carry with them. I didn't have a script. I rarely used one anymore. I knew my story well enough to let it live and breathe without cue cards. I stepped up to the podium and took a long, quiet breath before speaking. "My name is Shelby Whitaker," I began, just as I had a year ago. And for a long time, I believed I had to work twice as hard to be seen half as much. I believed I had to stay quiet to be respected. I believed that if I was just a little more patient, a little more polite, eventually someone would make room for me. I scanned the crowd slowly. They were listening, really listening. But what I've learned is that you don't have to wait for permission to take up space. You don't have to shrink yourself into the mold that makes everyone else comfortable. You can build your own table, set your own place, and invite the people who see your worth before you ever open your mouth. There was a pause, then applause. And in that moment, I saw a flash of something in their eyes. Belief, maybe, or recognition. Either way, I'd done what I came to do. After the speech, a young woman with dark curls and anxious hands approached me near the stage. She couldn't have been older than 22. She looked like she had something important to say, but didn't know where to begin. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. How did you know when it was time to stop trying to prove yourself to people who didn't want to see you?" I smiled. When I realized their blindness wasn't my burden to carry. She blinked, then nodded slowly, her lips parting in that way people do when something finally makes sense deep in their bones. That moment stayed with me. Life didn't become a fairy tale after the garden bloomed or after my name hit magazine covers. There were still days when I questioned myself, when I walked into rooms and felt the old ghost of self-doubt creeping in, whispering that maybe I still wasn't enough. But the difference was, I no longer gave those whispers power. I had learned how to meet them with truth, with memory, with the unshakable knowledge of everything I'd built when no one else thought I could. Colton and I had found something close to a real relationship again. We weren't best friends, and we never would be, but we respected each other now. We called each other out, and we showed up. On my 32nd birthday, he brought a cake to my office. No cameras, no big scene, just us and a quiet, "I'm proud of you," over paper plates and plastic forks. That was enough. My parents, well, they were still learning. My mother had started volunteering at the community garden on weekends. I'd catch her there pruning plants she couldn't name, laughing with neighbors she once might have ignored. My father had joined a mentorship group for young men re-entering the workforce after incarceration. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was growth. I didn't ask. I let them have their space to evolve, the same way I had fought for mine. As for me, I kept expanding. I opened a second consulting office in Austin and began laying the groundwork for a leadership academy specifically for women who had been overlooked in male-dominated industries. It would be called Room to Rise. Because that's what I needed all those years ago. And because now, I had the resources to give that to someone else. But perhaps the most unexpected part of my year came in the form of a letter. It arrived in a cream envelope, addressed in careful handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single page. Dear Shelby, you don't know me, but I know you. I was at the wedding, the one where they sat you in the kitchen. I was one of the caterers. I remember you. I remember how you smiled anyway. How you were kind to everyone, even though they didn't seem to treat you like you mattered. I wanted to say something that night, but I didn't. I didn't think my words would matter. But then I saw you on the news, standing in front of that garden with a microphone in your hand and power in your voice. And I realized something. Maybe I didn't need to be small to keep everyone else comfortable either. So I applied to college. I'm starting next fall. I just wanted to say thank you for not disappearing, for showing up, even when no one asked you to. Warmly, Amelia C. I sat with that letter for a long time. We don't always know who's watching, who we're inspiring by simply refusing to disappear. That's the part of this journey no one talks about. The invisible lives you touch just by being brave enough to stand. Sometimes the real revenge isn't about proving them wrong. Sometimes it's about living so fully and authentically that the people who once counted you out have no choice but to reckon with what they missed. A few months later, I hosted the first scholarship dinner for the young women entering the Room to Rise Academy. There were 12 of them, all different, all determined. As I looked out over the table we'd set together, fresh flowers, mismatched plates, laughter and noise, I thought back to that kitchen chair at the wedding, that cold, quiet corner where they thought I belonged. And I smiled, because now I was surrounded by women who weren't just invited to the table. They were building it with me. As the night wound down, I stood to give one final toast. To every woman who was ever made to feel like too much or not enough, I said, voice strong, heart full, may you never again wait to be chosen. May you always choose yourself. The glasses clinked, the music swelled, and I looked around at the world I'd built, brick by brick, breath by breath. I wasn't the same woman who had been seated in the kitchen that day. I was the architect of my own future, and I wasn't done yet. Have you ever been made to feel small by the very people who should have lifted you up? Share your story in the comments. If this journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more powerful narratives of healing, resilience, and redemption. Send this to someone who needs the courage to reclaim their voice. Remember, you don't need a seat at someone else's table. You can build your own. Thank you for listening to my story. You deserve to be seen, heard, and valued, exactly as you are.